Welcome back. This month we are doing a series of Bible studies based on current events. The current event that we're going to be taking a look at today is a recent poll done in the UK. The research company is called ComRes, and along with a think tank, Theos, they have done a research study about the relationship between war, violence, and religion. In the survey, the poll respondents were asked, do you feel like the world would be more peaceful in the absence of religion? And 47% of the people who responded said, yes, that would be true. Further, 70% of the respondents indicated that they believed that religion was the cause of most wars. Surprisingly, when asked whether or not religion was to blame, 81% said that it wasn't religion itself, but rather religious extremists. And in fact, 61% went on to say that religions themselves are pretty much peaceful. All of the research and polling led to a report that has recently been released by Christian ethicist Robin Gill, Killing in the Name of God, Addressing Religiously Inspired Violence. The report concluded that the claim that religion was the cause of most wars was actually not true. In fact, according to the Encyclopedia of Wars, throughout human history there have been approximately 1,700 wars. Only 123, approximately 7%, can be traced directly back to religion as a cause. Certainly there are many reasons why people would have this perception about religion and its basis, and it being the basis of war. Certainly the 9/11 attacks led to this misperception, has certainly fed that feeling for many. The report itself concluded that one of the main drivers was that the scriptures of Judaism, Islam, Christianity all have some difficult text in them that at times appear to support violence. Well, the report argues that Christians, Islams, Muslims all need to be very careful about how they handle their scriptures, and they need to read them with the intent of being peacemakers. It also went on to say that these groups need to also interpret scripture in light of the bigger meaning of the entire text. All of this leads us to really the focus of today's lesson, which is how do we handle scripture intelligently and with care? Well, let's take a look at some scripture verses. The first one I want us to take a look at is from Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through 2. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Well, this is a text that would certainly cause problems for us as Bible readers. It's certainly about religion launched by violence. God in this verse is directing the wholesale slaughter of entire groups of people. So the first question we would ask is, what is the use of a passage like this for us today? Last week we talked about the role of history and the importance of the historical setting and learning from history. What does this passage do for us? Does it help us learn about God? Does it help us learn about ourselves? What exactly can we learn from a passage such as this? And the second question is, what is the responsible way to handle a text like this? Our lesson writers this week suggest that perhaps the best way to handle a text like this is to understand that we may never fully be able to come up with a satisfactory answer. One of the quotes in this week's lesson is from New Testament professor Richard B. Hayes, is quoted as saying, if irreconcilable tensions exist between moral vision of the New Testament and that of a particular Old Testament text, the New Testament trumps the Old Testament. Hayes here seems to give us the what would Jesus do approach to interpreting scripture. Not a bad approach, quite honestly. Here's another passage of text for us to look at today from Luke's Gospel. This is from the 4th chapter, verses 28 and 29. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. Well, the context of this is Jesus is reading scripture in his hometown synagogue. He's quoting from Isaiah 61. He's talking about the mission of freeing the captives, bringing good news to the poor, and proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. In verse 21, he concludes, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." The crowd responded favorably to Jesus, thinking that perhaps this somehow would give them advantage. But no sooner did Jesus dispel that notion that the crowd turned on him, and Jesus becomes the target of religiously inspired violence. So there's a message here for us about how to handle scripture and how to handle situations when someone else's religious view is directly in contrast to ours. We have to keep our emotions in check. We need to be sure that anger doesn't become our response. We need to be thoughtful, and in the spirit of the entire gospel, we need to respond always in love. Here's another text, actually 2 verses, both from Matthew's gospel. The first one, chapter 10, verse 34. "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." Now listen to this next verse from Matthew's gospel that seems to be in contrast. From Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." So on the one hand we have, "I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." This is Jesus speaking. And on the other hand we have, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called the children of God." How do we reconcile these two things in the same gospel, both sayings that came out of Jesus' mouth? Well, I think the first thing we need to understand is context is everything. Looking at the verse from chapter 10, verse 34, if we were just to read a little further and to take a look at 34 through 39, we'd realize that sword, as it's used here, is really a metaphor for divisiveness. You see, what Jesus is really talking about in this particular text is he's saying you can have no other allegiances over and above the allegiance you have with me as a disciple. And he's going on to say that this cost of discipleship will cause divisiveness often within families. And so we need to really look at the context of a passage. Also, the second verse, which is the one from chapter 5 verse 9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." This reminds us that we always have to look at the bigger picture of the message of Scripture anytime we're interpreting an individual passage. You see, apart from the big message or the big picture, it would be easy to take individual verses and misinterpret them. In other words, would the Jesus that advocated being a peacemaker also advocate starting a war with a sword? Probably not. Over the course of history, we've seen this play itself out with people using scripture to justify things such as slavery, abuse of women, and even poverty. Let's take a look at a couple of verses that we're all familiar with. From Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ." And then we have Ephesians 5:22. "Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do the Lord." And from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 26, verse 11, "The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me." These are just some examples of verses that have been and can be used inappropriately to justify violence and inhumane treatment. You often hear John Lennon's song "Imagine" at demonstrations and remembrances. Some of the lyrics point to things like, "Imagine there was no heaven, no hell, no religion." What would the world really be like if there was no religion? Would having no religion lead people to living a more peaceful life? Well, these are some questions perhaps that we should grapple with, or perhaps we should simply leave today's lesson with a reminder of the importance of how we interpret and read Scripture and how we handle it appropriately. Scripture is intended to help us live out our best selves and to honor God and to serve others. May our prayer today be that we would handle Scripture as peacemakers and therefore be children of God. Well, I hope you'll join us again next week when we'll take another look at another biblical lesson inspired by some current event. Until then, I hope you have a great week. God bless you, and we'll see you again next time.